Serial killer Robert William Pickton is a hunter of girls of easy virtue, was born on October 24, 1949. He was convicted of the murders of 6 women. The media nicknamed him the Swineherd Killer. However, this serial killer confessed to committing 49 murders to a prison agent. The serial killer fed the remains of the murdered women to pigs, which he raised on his own farm. After Pickton's arrest in 2002, the police razed this farm to the ground. The authorities claimed that this was done in order to find evidence. However, the Canadian Society is sure that the destruction of the farm had a different purpose. The police did not want to see the buildings, because they reminded of their incompetence. Vancouver police officers still do not admit that for a very long time they simply turned a blind eye to the fact that women were disappearing in Vancouver's East Side. Which, in general, is not surprising. Girls of easy virtue disappeared entirely. According to official statistics, in the East Side, which is a very criminal area, up to 200 women die a year. From illnesses, overdoses, from fights with pimps or dissatisfied customers. The work of call girls is very dangerous. So if the police received information that another one of them had disappeared, no one paid attention to it. In 1996, serial killer Robert William Pickton registered a non-profit charity organization, the Pig Palace Recreation Society, claiming that they organize and they coordinate various events of sports and public organizations.
Hey, I'm not going to beat around the bush. You have to subscribe to the channel and like it so you don't miss new videos.
In fact, these events were extremely wild sex parties with the participation of female workers from Vancouver. All this took place in a converted slaughterhouse on a farm. Jamie Lee Hamilton, who had previously changed his gender, was the first to sound the alarm, and in 1998 he organized a non-profit enterprise, the Center for Sex Workers. Exactly. Hamilton, in one of his interviews, told for the first time that women who were abducted by an unknown serial killer were disappearing on the East Side. This article caught the eye of Detective Dave Dixon. And he, despite the dissatisfaction of his superiors, decided to check Hamilton's words. By February 1999, Dixon had an impressive list of girls who had disappeared without a trace. With this list, he went to his senior colleague, the famous detective Kim Rossmo. The list had a stunning effect on that one. After analyzing the list, Rossmo concluded that there is a serial killer in Vancouver who hunts for girls of easy virtue. The authorities reacted sharply negatively to the detective's conclusions. The Vancouver police really didn't want to hang a few dozen potential grouse around their necks. But Rossmo insisted and even filed an official report, which he later told reporters about. As a result, a real scandal broke out. The Vancouver police still had to take up the investigation of the disappearances, but Rossmo paid for the scandal with his career and had to leave the police. And the glory for catching one of Canada's bloodiest maniacs went to another detective. After the scandal in the press, a special group was created in Vancouver law enforcement agencies to investigate the disappearances on the East Side. Mountis also joined the investigation, which translates to horsemen, as the special services of the Canadian Royal Mounted Police are called in Canada. The connection of the riders was due to the fact that Americans like to come to Vancouver for the so-called sex tourism. Special Group on the search for missing women was named the Task Force for the Search for Missing Women, and it was headed by a high-ranking employee, Donovan Adams. The version that tourists from the USA were involved in the disappearances was at one time the main one. Employees went to the neighbors and interrogated several maniacs convicted of similar crimes. But while the police and riders were interrogating American serial killers, women continued to disappear in Vancouver. By 2000, their list amounted to more than 100 missing. Not all of them were victims of the East Side hunter. Traces of some were found in other provinces of Canada. But the girls kept disappearing. In December 1999, 25-year-old Tiffany Louise Drew disappeared without a trace. Her pimp turned to the police with a demand to start a search for the woman. But he almost turned out to be behind the grid. Vancouver police officers once again refused to hang a potential grouse on themselves. The investigative team learned about this disappearance from a public organization engaged in the social adaptation of women of easy virtue. Representatives of the same organization leaked information about the refusal of the police to look for them to the press. The media began to seriously criticize the work of the police and their unwillingness to investigate the disappearances, hinting that the special group, instead of looking for the East Side Hunter, rides at the state expense in the United States. The composition of the task force has changed, and the police were instructed to work out Canadian citizens as well. Detectives began to check for possible involvement in the disappearance of all who has ever come to the attention of the police in connection with offenses against priestesses of love. Two brothers, owners of a pig farm in the vicinity of Vancouver, were also among those being checked. David and Robert Pickton have been repeatedly noticed in antisocial behavior. The youngest of the brothers, David, was already brought to court in 1992 for abuse and robbery. He then managed to negotiate with the victim, and he got off with only 30 days of community service. The older brother Robert celebrated in 1997. On March 23, he brought a priestess of love into the house, where he attacked her and handcuffed her. But she managed to get hold of a kitchen knife. She wounded Robert and ran away from home. The handcuffs were removed from her only by the police. Robert was arrested. But David found the victim, paid her money, she withdrew her statement, and the case was closed, and the charge was dropped in January 1998. The brothers were taken into circulation and very interesting things immediately turned out. The Picktons were listed not only as the owners of the pig farm, but also as the founders of an allegedly charitable organization called the Pig Palace Recreation Society. This organization, called a charity for the sole purpose of avoiding part of taxation, she organized parties on a pig farm. The most colorful in these events was the smell coming from several dozen pigs and their waste products. Surprisingly, among Canadians and guests of the country, pig parties were popular. When the police became interested in Picktons, it quickly became clear that there was no charity in their organization. The organization was officially closed, and the tax authorities became interested in the brothers. For a while they fell out of fields of view. But a year later, the detectives visited the brothers again. This time with a warrant for the arrest of the older brother and a warrant for a thorough search. By the end of 2001, Canadian police were convinced that the East Side Hunter and the Green River serial killer, Gary Ridgway, were one and the same person. However, American law enforcement agencies, the authorities primarily investigated crimes committed in the United States. So the Canadians have not yet been able to have a thoughtful conversation with the arrested maniac. And then one of the informants of the Horseman told about a conversation he overheard in a bar. It followed from the informant's message that the Pickton brothers discussed the method of murder. Robert advised David to kill by injection. The trace of the injection will not cause any suspicion. And antifreeze is difficult to detect in the blood. The police became interested in this conversation and decided to take a closer look at the brothers. It soon became clear that some of the disappeared had not been seen after they entered Robert Pickton's trailer. In addition, another informant said that he saw women's handbags and purses in the trailer. The investigation team began to prepare for a search at the Pickton farm, which was quite problematic. The territory of the farm exceeded 86,000 square meters. Therefore, the main efforts were directed to the search of the trailer in which Robert Pickton lived. On February 5, 2002, Robert was invited to the mounted police for a conversation. While he was answering questions, special forces were pulled to the pig farm, who took the entire perimeter of the farm under control. When Pickton was released on bail of $1,000 the next day, the police had only suspicions, but there was no evidence yet, and he returned to the farm. Criminologists were already running there and detectives. On February 6, 2002, the police searched for illegal firearms. Pickton was charged with illegal possession of weapons. He was later released and was under police supervision. A few days later, the police received a second court order to search the farm as part of the investigation into the case of missing women in British Columbia. The first findings convinced the police that they were on the right track. A silver handbag was found in Robert's trailer. Exactly the same was with Surina Abotswe, whose missing person statement, received on August 22, 2001. And a little later, inhalers were found under the trailer window, on which labels with the girl's name were attached. Surina had asthma and constantly used an inhaler. On February 22, 2002, Robert Pickton was charged with the abduction and murder of Surina Abotswe and Mona Wilson. And he went back to prison. On April 2, 2002, 3 more charges were added in the murders of Jacqueline McDonald, Diane Rock and Heather Bottomley. Then on April 9, 2002, Andrea Jusbury was charged with the murder, which was soon followed by a new charge of the murder of Brenda Wolfe. In order to search the farm more thoroughly, it was necessary to remove all the animals from there, and also to bring construction equipment to the farm. It took almost a month. The special team was replenished with 40 criminologists and 16 investigators who had experience in investigating mass graves. September 20, 2002 to a Maniac. 4 more charges were added in the murders of Georgina Papine, Patricia Johnson, Helen Hallmark and Jennifer Firminger. On October 3, 2002, 4 more murders of Heather Chinnock, Tanya Hollick, Sherry Irving and Inga Hall were charged, resulting in a total. The number of victims was 15. After that, an agent of the Horsemen, who had experience in prison, was planted with Robert Pickton. This was the beginning of the largest investigation in Canadian history. This agent managed to get into the suspect's confidence. Serial killer Robert Pickton told him that he had killed a total of 49 women. Just one was not enough for an even score, the serial killer told, laughing. The cops won't find anything anyway. I hid the body securely. The police were going to sift even the sand on the farm. Which, by the way, the police did, sifting through tons of soil to find evidence. Search for the remains of women who died on a pig farm stretched out for several years. The remains of 30 women were found. Most were identified as a result of DNA examinations. As a result of the actions of criminologists and investigators, all the buildings on the territory of the pig farm were literally dismantled by stone and board. It's worth saying that all the time while criminologists were looking for the remains of the victims, ordinary citizens were watching them. In 2002, some travel agencies even offered their clients a kind of tour to the crime scene. And in the immediate vicinity of the cordon, which worked around the clock. For more than 2 years, the relatives of the missing women have organized a kind of wailing wall. By putting on public display photos of missing women who were killed by a serial killer. In general, the relatives of the victims were very willing to give interviews, tearfully telling about the fate of their daughters or sisters. They even held pickets outside the courthouse, where Pickton was tried. Moreover, these pickets sometimes acquired a very unusual form. In particular, one day relatives invited Indian shamans to the courthouse, who staged a real ceremony on the street, trying to summon the spirits of the dead women. And few people wondered, where were these same relatives when their relatives sold their bodies? On March 10, 2004, the police said that serial killer Robert Pickton could mix human flesh with pork, which he sold to the public. The health authorities of the region later issued a warning. The investigation also claimed that the maniac fed the victims' bodies directly to his pigs. On May 26, 2005, Robert Pickton was indicted on 12 more murder charges, bringing the total number of first-degree murder charges to 27. The trial of Robert Pickton began on January 30, 2006 in New Westminster. Serial killer pleaded not guilty to 27 first-degree murders in British Supreme Court, Columbia. Journalists were not allowed to report part of the news from this process. On March 2, 2007, Judge James Williams dismissed one of the 27 charges due to lack of evidence. On August 9, 2007, Judge Williams divided the charges. As a result, the maniac was charged with only 6 murders. Despite the fact that the remains of 30 women were found on a pig farm. and Pickton himself confessed to a cellmate in 49 murders, Canadian law enforcement agencies decided that 6 would be enough for Pickton. But it is quite possible that Judge James Williams, who presided over the trial, did not want to delay the court hearings much, dealing with several dozen murders. But all the same, the trial dragged on for almost a year, which is quite a lot for Canadian justice. In December 2007, the jury found Robert Pickton guilty and the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment on December 11, 2007. Pickton will be able to file his first appeal only after 25 years. If we recall that at the time of sentencing Pickton was 58 years old, it is unlikely that the serial killer will live to the moment when he can ask for early release. However, Pickton and his lawyer are trying to overturn the verdict of the jury, appealing to the fact that, they say, the jury could not be impartial and knew about the crimes on the pig farm even before courts. After all, the media has been very actively covering everything that has been going on around the Pickton pig farm since 2002. On January 9, 2008, Pickton's lawyers filed a notice with the British Columbia Court of Appeal seeking a new trial on 6 charges of second-degree murder, and the serial killer demanded $10 million from the Canadian government as compensation for the destroyed pig farm. On July 30, 2010, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled rejecting Pickton's appeal and upheld the verdict.